Good evening, Ali. I was looking for you. कहाँ खो गए थे?
Good evening, sir. Sir, I
Good
was
evening.
there watching your nice program. बहुत बढ़िया, sir.
Start, Alim, please.
So, our speakers is there, chairpersons are there. Welcome everyone to this 24th edition of Thursday Musings. आज बहुत सारे webinars हैं for IPS, so I think in this continuation we dedicate this program to the IPS Foundation Day. Tufan sir, please
Yes.
take over. Yeah, Tufan sir, yeah. So,
You
our
minimize
chairperson
introduction.
today is Tufan Pati sir. Everyone is knowing him, sir.
I am Tufan Pati,
Sir, please take
and
over.
with me is Alim and Amrit. My introduction is finished.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Let's move to the chairperson.
Okay. We have got chairpersons, Dr. Amrit Alim का भी शिफ्ट हो गया.
हो गया sir.
Dr. Jayaranjan Ram from Kolkata. He is a consultant psychiatrist based in Calcutta. He has done in child psychiatry in UK, CCST and MRC Psych, and he is MD from NIMHANS. He received his education in Kolkata, Bangalore and England. He co-founded Mental Health Foundation, which primarily focuses on working with young people in community. He is also attached to Apollo Glen Angels Hospital in Kolkata. Most of his current knowledge is now based on what he reads in live CME WhatsApp group.
I think that is
Well,
the most important point. So I must thank Alim and
Yeah.
thank you for
So we are
inviting
friends
me.
there. We are colleagues there. Jayaranjan, welcome.
Thank you.
Chairperson. Next please. Next please. Dr. Sanjay Barot. Dr. Sanjay Barot has 30 years, 3 decades of experience as a practicing psychiatrist. He is consultant psychiatrist Anand Hospital, Gandhidham, and he is past associations Baroda Medical College of Baroda. He is involved activities, life member of IMA, fellow member of Indian Psychiatric Society, is fellow member of IPS, is fellow member of Private Psychiatry Association, Association Private Psychiatry of India, and he is there. Welcome him. And on this day, I would like to remind, I think everybody knows, must have participated, that today is the Foundation Day of Indian Psychiatric Society. A few minutes ago, it was being told by our president, Dr. Dalal, that on 7th of January 1947, 13 leading doctors working in the field of mental health decided during the Indian Science Congress held in Delhi University, which was presided by the then Chief Minister, the then Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. And the association was formed, and the first annual conference was held in Patna. The first president was Dunjibai, and the first secretary was R.B. Davis from Ranchi. And the story has started on that day, and it has moved on and on. On this day, esteemed date, we are fortunate to have written Thursday and coinciding with the Thursday musings. With these words, I hand over the meeting to the chairperson, and I am very sorry the ceremony of foundation has taken about 6 to 7 minutes from our schedule. We'll make it up by extending. Thank you.
Right.
Over to Dr. Barrett and over to Dr. Ram. Please take over.
Yes, sir. Dr. Jayaram can introduce the topic and the speaker, sir.
Okay. It's a pleasure kind of being here, and also it's a huge pleasure and privilege to kind of introduce a very old friend of mine, Dr. Amit Sen, and who actually doesn't need an introduction. We trained together in NIMHANS and did a lot of things then when we were students in NIMHANS, which we now tell children not to do. So it's kind of ironic that we are now kind of, serious practitioners of child psychiatry. Dr. Sen has trained in AFMC and then in NIMHANS, and then went on to do his child psychiatry training in UK. Where he got his CCST and then came back to India and started an organization called Children First, along with his wife Shailja. And Children First, I have been following their work for many years. They do absolutely fantastic work, multidisciplinary working. And Amit has been not only kind of involved in clinical work, but a huge repertoire of community, real community work in many diverse setting. And I have heard him speak on ADHD on several occasions, and each time I have learned something new. So it's over to him, and a great pleasure. Thank you. I didn't read any of it because I know his biodata by heart. So
Thank you, Jay. Thank you so much indeed. As he was saying, Dr. Jayaranjan Ram, that we have been partners, and and it's a privilege to be here indeed. So thank you all from the Odisha branch of IPS, and thank you, Dr. Tufan Pati, for inviting me, and Dr. Alim Siddiqui for organizing this. Um, so I think without getting into many more formalities, let me quickly share my screen and start. Just a moment.
Right, please.
Sir,
Yeah,
I'll mute
and
everybody. Host and co-host can unmute themselves.
I'll start my presentation.
Yeah, sir, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Okay, just a moment. Let me just put it in PPT mode. Yes, that's right. Yeah. So from what I understand is that I'm speaking to a very erudite and experienced bunch of mental health professionals, including psychiatrists and psychologists. So I will presume that you know a lot of um, a lot about ADHD. I'm sure. I mean, it's something that is, I think, come to the fore more and more with the increasing mental health difficulties in young people, adolescent, young adults, and so I'm going to stick to mostly um, on presentations and challenges that I have myself have faced in my career in recognizing what ADHD looks like. Indeed, I believe that as I started working with young people with ADHD, once I joined child psychiatry, I realized that I have many of those features, and I have also spoken in public about my own ADHD. Indeed, my in later years, once I had my children, my son got diagnosed formally with it, so he clearly inherited some of my traits. So I have lived it, and I have also done the journey with many young people and their families about ADHD. So I'll a lot of what I say will be from that perspective. Yeah. Now. Let's start with looking at some children that I have seen. Obviously, name changed and some of the other details changed for confidentiality. So let's look at 4-year-old Zorba. So Zorba is a very sensitive, creative boy who loves art and craft, listening to story, and has a huge knowledge about animals. But in school at 4, I mean, he's in preschool, he's not making friends. He pushes and hits out when upset, and he doesn't follow any group instructions. He's often spoken about as being dreamer, being lost in class particularly, and he's slow in pretty much everything, eating his meals, listening to instructions, getting ready for anything for school or even for a birthday party. So and when he becomes overwhelmed with some of these expectations that his parents or other people have, as they would for a 4-year-old, he starts crying. He becomes completely overwhelmed, and he hits out, as I said, when frustrated. Zorba is very self-conscious and very sensitive. He knows that other people are judging him, they're looking at him, and that makes life even more difficult for him. He's not learning in school. He doesn't seem to pay attention, and he's been branded already at the age of 4 as a slow learner. So, and this happens to uh, many young people, many little children who start school early, very early, I believe in our system, and from the age of 3, and many of them are subject to um, such expectations and judgments, if you like, which begins to make life difficult from a very early age. So just to have a look at what are the things besides, of course, the very common features that you would expect in a child who's 4 or 5 years old, who may be heading towards a diagnosis of ADHD. Because, I mean, I'm sure all of you know that we don't diagnose formally ADHD before 6. So what do you see in a 4-year or a 5-year-old, which is, in addition to the typical inattention and the hyperactivity and flitting from one activity to the other? Zorba clearly shows symptoms which are not typical of a hyperactive child, but yet he's showing some features which are perhaps predictive of a certain profile as he grows up, right? So preschoolers, which is up to the age of 5, let's say, and I'm calling them preschoolers because I still believe that formal school starts at 6 when children go to class 1, although in our system, the reality is very different, and so many children have to contend with such hard learning very early and much before their brains and their neural circuits are ready for it. Preschoolers, of course, can be boisterous and disruptive, but they can also be very shy, sensitive, and withdrawing, like Zorba. And in either case, they are often talked to or talked about as being high maintenance children. They require a lot of attention, lot of supervision, instructions, and which they often do not follow. And they might put themselves at risk even at an early stage by not really understanding what might hurt them or put them in danger and so on. Parents often, even at an early stage like this, seem quite helpless and overwhelmed, confused about what's happening to their children when they compare their child to another child, maybe in the family or extended family or amongst their friends, etc. Right? What we again see many times in this group, in this very early childhood group, is emotional dysregulation. And by that I mean that by the time children are 4 or 5, they're able to contain their feelings, their impulses to a certain degree. They're able to tolerate certain amount of frustration, transitions, if you like. And kids like Zorba and who are headed towards this trajectory often do not seem to have developed that emotional regulation, and therefore they often have frequent meltdowns. Sometimes these tantrums could be very prolonged and could be triggered by little things that otherwise you might wonder as to why did that matter to this little boy so much, or this little girl. And many times, as opposed to perhaps the common belief, these kids have social difficulties. They have difficulty in settling in social situations, in school, in classrooms, in making and maintaining friends. Although their motivation to make friends is not lacking at all. They do want to. They want to be in the middle of things, but they somehow, because of a lack of perhaps cognitive faculties which have not yet developed, are unable to do that, right? So again, typically, these children do not learn in school. They are capable of learning, mind you. It's not as if they are dull or they're intellectually impaired, but yet learning in school does not happen because they cannot follow a conversation in a group or cannot follow group instructions. On the other hand, if you actually sit one-on-one with them, and if you are able to actually engage in an activity of their interest, such as in Zorba's case, which could be stories or animals, then their learning is absolutely fabulous, sometimes even better than other children. And that's a paradox. And that's sometimes what confuses parents and teachers alike, right? So we begin to see early signs of learning difficulties, and we know that kids with ADHD often have comorbidities in the form of specific learning disabilities, such as dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, and so on. But they might also show early learning difficulties just due to the attention difficulty, just because of their inability to follow on or follow through with tasks that enable learning. Yeah. And the last thing that they have, and this is again fairly common in our experience, is what I call prominent sensory motor difficulties. So, and our occupational therapy colleagues are often very good at picking this up, and they often work with this cluster of symptoms, which constitutes which includes, let's say, a very high sensitivity to smells and tastes and texture and tactile sensitivity and so on. It also, in addition to that, as a extension of the same cluster of neurological predispositions, they often have difficulty with balance, muscle tone, fine motor skills, and so on, right? And this is again a frequent co-finding that we have in children who show these cluster of symptoms like attention difficulties and uh, emotional dysregulation. And here again, I think that in the medical fraternity, perhaps it's not that talked about. It's not perhaps that well understood. So because we work with children, because the services are so geared towards working with little children from early childhood onwards, we do have a bunch of occupational therapists in our team, and they form a very, very important part of our multidisciplinary team. Let's look at slightly older Sonia. She's 10, and she's perhaps more like the typical ADHD kid that you can imagine or you see, I'm sure, in your practice. She's into sports. She's full of energy. She keeps getting up from her chair. She cannot sit still for too long. And she needs repeated reminders to be on task to complete her task. She does not copy from the board at all. She knows the answers orally, but hates writing. So when there's a class discussion going on, her hand goes up straight away, even before the question is completed sometimes. And she's ready for a discussion. She's raring to go. But when the time comes to organize her task, particularly written work, she is often found wanting, and most of her copies are incomplete. Sometimes she doesn't even start the written work in class. Generally happy-go-lucky, but recently she's been saying things like, I'm dumb, nobody likes me, and I don't like school. And she's also started scratching and cutting in her notebooks a lot, almost as if to, with the awareness that she's not achieving what she's expected to do, and not happy with the performance or the quality of her work. So constantly scratching and sometimes even ripping off a page from a notebook. And even more recently, she started complaining of nausea, aches and pains, and so on. I'm sure we all know that a lot of the times when children are under stress, such symptoms are actually a manifestation of anxiety, and that's what Sanya has begun to demonstrate or to manifest. So in primary school, which is from, let's say, 6 years to 11 years, um, no doubt children become more self-aware, and as a result of which they become more aware of expectations around them, and that gives rise to anxiety. And many times children in with this profile tend towards becoming perfectionists. They want to get it perfect because they're not getting it. They're not living up to the expectations of others. And so perfectionism, anxiety, these kinds of symptoms begin to play up. And many of them appears as if they develop something like OCD. They become obsessive about their work. Some of them will not sleep till they have completed their homework, which often takes them much longer than other children. So they're way past midnight, they're sitting with their copies, scratching, tearing their notebooks, and then yet again attempting to do something which the teacher expects them to do, but finding it really, really hard. And because of some of these things that happen, and because our schools in India particularly are so academically oriented, they develop low self-esteem, right? And they often develop a negative reputation in school, in the school, in the playground, because they're frustrated, because they can't cope with the things that they're expected to do. They could become aggressive, impulsive, and many times quite oppositional and defiant. So uh, ever so often, when we see a child in this age group of 6 to 11 from primary school, they come with a diagnosis of ODD, oppositional defiant disorder. And to me, all that it says is this child is, is badly behaved in the eyes of parents or the teacher sometimes. And but it doesn't quite say much about what is causing this bad behavior. It doesn't quite say what is the inner world of this child, and that is where I think that we as clinicians, as practitioners, have to figure out that if a child comes with ODD, and indeed with conduct disorder as it does in adolescence, and we'll talk about that a bit, what is it that's causing it? And in my experience, it is mostly because they're not able to live up to expectations. Oftentimes, parents, teachers become critical of their behaviors, of their inability to do things that are expected of them. And in return, they become oppositional, they become defiant, they become angry and low, and they begin to have mood swings and so on. Another new diagnosis or category of young people who have a large overlap with this group is a new diagnostic category called severe mood dysregulation disorder, which is included in the DSM-5. Now, for the longest time, since I've been working in child psychiatry, which is for more than 25, nearly 30 years, uh, we were um, we were confused about a bunch of symptoms that often children who were neurodevelopmentally different would have. These kids often would be extremely sensitive, would have mood swings, often would have sensory motor difficulties, as I talked about, in a younger age group, sometimes even after they have come into this category of uh, the primary school, and they show huge sensitivities, even physical sensitivities. And again, they find it hard to deal with transitions. They get triggered by very small things, and sometimes again, adults wonder what ticked them off so badly that they had a huge temper tantrum afterwards. They find it difficult to get out of the bad moods that they get into. And for the longest time, in our understanding, these children, particularly in the West, especially in the USA, would had begun to get diagnoses of a bipolar disorder. So I don't know if any of you followed this. In the 90s and the early 2000s, there was a huge upsurge of bipolar disorder in children even. And suddenly they started talking about the prevalence of bipolar disorder being as much as in adults in young children. And and when we saw some of these kids who were getting diagnosed and coming to us, and we saw their trajectory, we realized that it's not quite that. Indeed, these children are more prone to developing depression as they become older, and that got recognized over a period of time. And eventually, the DSM-5 categorize them in a separate diagnostic category called severe mood dysregulation disorder, which forms a part of the affective disorder. I think it's the first one that's mentioned there. And many of these kids between 6 and 11 show these typical mood swings and sensitivities and a negative cloud that they get under. And they find it very hard to get out of it. And like I said, they find it hard to transition from one class to the other, or from junior to middle school, and so on, right? And they have difficulties in relationships. And again, they are very high maintenance children in their parents' eyes. And there's a huge overlap between this group of children and the kids who have, the emotion. I mean, we have talked about the emotional dysregulation. There's a huge overlap there, but they also have overlaps in attention difficulties, in executive skills, in managing their world around them. So that's the other thing that we need to remember, that many times when we have a child showing symptoms of ADD, ADHD early, it may be the mood dysregulation. It may be the emotional dysregulation that might show up, as a as a presenting complaint, or the presenting the most prominent thing. And then what happens is that typically they get a diagnosis of a mood disorder or a conduct disorder, or ODD typically, right? Again, children in this age group, in the primary age group, do not perform in class very well, especially with written work. Now, like Sonia was, quite a bright kid otherwise, and was learning fairly well if the input was oral and if she was able to actually give her output orally. But the moment it came to written work, and unfortunately that is the way children are evaluated in our education system, then she came wanting, and she could not perform at all. And again, the other thing that is often used for these children, and that starts at this age group and it continues for perhaps the rest of their life, is that they underachieve. Many teachers will tell their parents during parent-teacher meetings that, you know what, your child is really bright, but she just doesn't try. She doesn't make an effort. Only if she was paying more attention and if she wrote down what she knew, she would do so much better. And that again is a signal to say that let's investigate whether this child has attention difficulties, whether this child has difficulties with impulse control and has restlessness and hyperactivity as well, right? And of course, there are frequent complaints from school as a result, and parents become increasingly stressed. And that stress then begins to, get manifested in their behavior or in their expressions towards their children, and towards the child who is the so-called problem child by then. And they get a lot of criticism, a lot of flack, a lot of scolding, a lot of harsh words. And that again makes the picture much more complex. In fact, we believe that makes it, some of the ODD and the behavioral symptoms, the emotional dysregulation, even more stark and prominent. So let's look at Sahil now. He's 15. Sahil is 15, and by the time he's 15, he has started hating school. He says, "I hate studies, I hate school." Although he's a voracious reader, mind you, right? So, and he's considered often as a philosopher. in his peer, not just amongst his peers, but also amongst his teachers, because he asks deep questions, he's into debating, and he questions everything, especially our education system, and he hates the education system. He's a self-taught drummer, he wants to become a musician, and he is into a lot of reading, as I said, but most of his reading and music is very dark and disturbing, so if even when adults listen to what he's listening to or what he's reading, they get very concerned about the content of it. And of course, by now, parents and teachers have started giving up on him because he will not study. He's bunking classes by now. He won't submit his assignments. He's failing exams, arguing with his teachers, and he has severe anger outbursts. And more recently, he has increasing curiosity about substances, and he started experimenting. And this again is the presentation we find. Such children often come with a diagnosis of a range of behavioral problems and come with a diagnosis of conduct disorder. Time has lapsed and they have not been picked up for their attention difficulties, for their hardships in all environments, be it in school, be it at home, and many times even in the playground, right? And they have started reacting to it, and they've started showing behaviors which are so hard to deal with for the rest of us that we have to find a label, we have to categorize them, we have to discipline them. And the more we try to discipline them and punish them or make boundaries, the worse it becomes. And that's the paradox again of diagnosing a kid with conduct disorder and trying to treat them through behavioral interventions, right? Now, as you can imagine by now, kids who are impulsive, who want to, already are rebelling big time, are opposing everything, are also ready to break the boundaries in all spheres, and many of their behaviors become risk-taking, including substance misuse, relationship issues, and so on. And they begin to visit, both in the net and the physical world, spaces that could be dangerous for them. Many of them by now begin to slip into depression and anxiety. And again, ever so often we see children who are depressed or have an anxiety disorder when they come to us, anytime between the ages of 13 to 18, let's say, actually have an underlying condition which is developmental. And many times it is to do with ADHD, attention difficulties, a learning disability, which gradually has developed into something more complicated. Yeah? So again, school refusal is not uncommon at all. They drop out of formal education many times. There is a breakdown of relationships with parents, a lot of conflicts with them. And again, there are very damaging narratives or reputations they pick up of being a loser, being lazy, or completely giving up on life, being a bad influence on other children, and so on, right? And you can imagine, if that's what they're getting from the world, what must be their own sense of self? And that clearly ends up they end up having a poor self-image and often a fragmented identity. And so you see them in if you want to categorize them again, sorry, yeah, if you want to categorize them, they can be categorized into a conduct disorder, anxiety, depression. But if you scratch under the surface, you might be able to actually discover many other things that have led to it. So they've kind of come together for this young man to present itself like this. Yeah. So whenever there is depression, or there is really bad behavior, or if there are huge mood swings or risk-taking behaviors in a young person, a boy or a girl, do question the possibility of an ADHD, and particularly ADHD, attention difficulties, impulse control. Let's now look at a young adult. Let's look at Zubair, who was 28 when he came to us. He had already gone to many psychiatrists and many other doctors and psychologists in therapy, and he was angry and skeptic about everything. And he came for the last time. He told me, "I'm coming for the last time because my mother has really requested me. I'm coming to see you." And by then he was hating his father, and he had often come close to blows with him a few times. And when we dug in a little deeper, we realized that he struggled through his school and college and got a lot of criticism and flack from his father. But by the time he was a young adult, he decided not to take that anymore. And so he started retaliating. And you can imagine the consequences in a home when that happens. So but Zubair was also considered bright and talented, but he dropped out of college. He was a black belt in karate. He was a budding DJ. He had tried his hands in many jobs, but couldn't stick to any. He had a girlfriend of 2 years, but he had broken up with him just before he came to see us. And according to in his own words, she said that he was too intense and unpredictable. even a therapist, who was an experienced therapist who I referred him to, felt uncomfortable because he was pushing boundaries. He was asking her personal questions, and his body language was such that she felt uncomfortable. And she came and told me about this. Not that she gave up therapy on him, but she came and reported it. We discussed, and we figured out ways of dealing with it, and also the reasons why he might be so, right? Uh, and despite his macho persona, he would come on his motorcycle, a Bullet, and he had a studded helmet, and he had a mohawk haircut, all of that. But deep underneath that, he had huge self-doubts about himself, about who he was. And of course, he had gone through binge drinking, cannabis use, had tried other hard drugs. And when we saw him, he came with a range of depressive symptoms, mood swing, and had received a diagnosis of a bipolar affective disorder. And that's not surprising. If you can see the profile, many people will probably think a lot of this turmoil, this up and down, perhaps is due to bipolar disorder. In adult ADHD, how does it present then? No doubt there are concentration difficulties. There is a degree of hyperactivity, but the presentation is different. Like the typical outward hyperactivity is no longer there. Indeed, there is a inner restlessness or even agitation when it's severe, when the ADHD is severe. And many adults would talk about how their mind wanders. Even when they're having a conversation, they can't stick to it. And there's ceaseless mental activity. Many young people come and report to us that they get tired of the number of thoughts they have at the same time, right? And of course, impulsivity continues. Although overt hyperactivity comes down by the time they become, young adults, but impulsivity continues, and they're seeking stimulation constantly. And that sometimes gets them into risk-taking behaviors and conflict with law and so on, right? And again, just as in the case of Zubair, they cross boundaries, there are transgressions in relationships, even without them realizing. I have had young people with ADHD coming to me and saying, you know what, I have done things which I feel ashamed about later. I've been in a relationship where I've crossed boundaries and later repented, but I did not realize where I had to stop. And can you teach me how to do that? And nowadays, whenever I'm in a relationship, whenever I'm with a friend or somebody in an intimate situation, I'm constantly asking them, is this all right? Can I do this? Can I do that? And so on. So indeed, they have a certain difficulty in understanding some of these social boundaries. And not surprisingly, therefore, they have difficulty in maintaining relationships. Many of them drop out of college despite being considered bright, like Zubair. And again, it's common for us to see young people who have dropped out of college, not just in our country, but who have gone abroad with flying colors. They have done very well in their 12th boards. They have had the best, CVs and portfolios. They've gone to some of the top universities, dropped out after 1 or 2 years and come back. And sometimes in depression, sometimes very, very anxious about, what they encountered once they had to contend with many things on their own, and they could not do it. They could not manage their time. They could not organize their lives well enough to be able to perform in a foreign country in a new situation. And they came back, bright as they may be. And when we then again dig into their past and take a developmental history, we realize that it was always there, but they got the support from school, from their parents. They got the supervision to be able to do well because they were bright. They were intelligent kids. Many of them are. But once they are on their own, they find it very, very hard to sustain it. So many of them drop out from college and come, and some of them come to us for therapy and I can say with confidence that the large majority of them are able to go back, after being diagnosed and getting the treatment that they get. I'm sure you know that people with adult ADHD often change jobs. Their sleep onset is initial. They have initial insomnia. They often talk excessively, and of course they have depression, anxiety disorders, polysubstance abuse, and we know that there is clear evidence that young adults or adults with ADHD have a higher predisposition towards bipolar affective disorder, perhaps 2 to 3 times. I mean, there was a time when, again, some of the American psychiatrists were saying that 60% of kids who have ADHD eventually develop bipolar disorder. And now we realize that perhaps what they developed was not a bipolar disorder, but was depression. And indeed, you would get mood swings. And just like Zubair was diagnosed with bipolar, many were perhaps diagnosed excessively for bipolar disorder. And the other thing that that surprises me often is that they come with diagnosis of a borderline personality disorder. And that's because of the emotional dysregulation, etc. So perhaps there is some truth in the comorbidity that these people share. People with ADHD are prone to developing depression, anxiety, polysubstance misuse, substance dependence, and so on. They also develop bipolar disorder more often than the normal population. However, it's interesting, and this again is something that we see in our practice. And Dr. Philip Asherson, who works in the Maudsley Clinic in London, has done extensive work on how some of these, how ADHD can mimic some of these disorders, right? Like it can mimic anxiety because, adults with ADHD often find themselves wanting in situations. They're constantly feeling that they can't do what they're expected to do. They worry about performance deficit. They feel overwhelmed because work piles up. They feel restless. And these begin to avoid the situations due to the ADHD symptoms, like waiting in queues, social situations, etc. And that can look like anxiety. And with the sleep disturbances, the mental restlessness, if you just tick the boxes, this could very well look like anxiety. And that's what many times they get a diagnosis of. Similar to that, they can also get, and this again is, as you said, as you can see, it was published in the Lancet as to how ADHD can mimic these different categories. It can mimic depression because most of them have very chronic low self-esteem, unstable mood, they're impatient, they're irritable, they have poor concentration, sleep disturbances. And if you again tick the boxes of the DSM criteria, many of them would qualify for depression. And yet again, they could also be diagnosed with personality disorder because they have chronic trait-like psychopathology. And they have emotional instability, behavioral problems, relationship difficulties, a lot of impulsive behavior, and so on. And that, again, you could say that comes under cluster B. And so it's not surprising that many of them then therefore get diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. And lastly, of course, they have indeed can mimic bipolar disorder. And this is so common in our practice that we see somebody with a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. Some of them do, of course, but some of them have ADHD with depression. And what happens is that when they, in the better phases, they behave like a ADHD person who's restless, who's hyperactive, whose mind is racing, and that looks like a hypomanic episode. And so when they're better, they look like hypomanic. So they often get diagnosed as bipolar 2. Again, restlessness, overactivity, sleep disturbances, mood swings, ceaseless unfocused mental activity and distractibility. You can imagine how that fits into so neatly into the hypomanic mold. So a young person with ADHD having dysthymia, having a depressive disorder, who's going up and down with the moods, could very much look like a bipolar disorder. So it could mimic some of these conditions, and it can also be comorbid. And it's so important to tease it out. Again, here is a landmark study of, again, comorbidities, and what we see are affective disorders: dysthymia, bipolar disorder, any mood disorder for that matter, anxiety disorders, and substance misuse. These are the three main comorbidities that you see, in young people with ADHD. So clearly, ADHD presents with different faces. I mean, if you've seen one child or one young person with ADHD, you've seen one young person with ADHD, because each one of them is so different from the other. But the other complicating factor is that it keeps changing. So a Zorba might end up like a Sahil when he grows up. So in the beginning, he may have, seem like a child who's having huge difficulty with tantrums and attachment and so on, and later on might look like a conduct disorder. And that change that you see is also can be very, very dramatic indeed. Yeah. And Sonia can also then, become a very rebellious young adult when she grows up. So here it is again, how some of the symptom clusters change. I'm not going to spend too much of time on this, just to focus a little bit on the Indian perspective, because we do have some factors, some environmental factors, which impact ADHD in its own way, right? And the first thing, of course, is a lack of awareness. Many times when we make a diagnosis of ADHD, a child who's got referred from school for behavior difficulties, and because they're tearing their head apart and they don't know how to handle him or her. And when this young person goes back with a report of ADHD, the principal looks at the parents and says, there's nothing like ADHD. We don't believe it. Your child is badly behaved and you need to fix him or her, and that is so common in our system. Again, kids are often named and shamed, and we believe that they pick up what is called called a problem saturated narrative. In the kinds of therapies and interventions we do, we often believe that the stories that these children carry are more damaging than the ADHD itself. It damages the psyche, the position in the real world, in the social world, much more than the ADHD itself. And that is because of the attitude and the kind of blame and negative stories they often carry, right? And again, because of the stigma, it's tragic that mental health professionals is their last resort. And this again was actually borne out by a community-based study in Goa by Patel and co, where they found that it didn't study the prevalence, but it did study some of the dynamics of kids who have ADHD, and they figured that there are two main findings they had. One is that mental health professionals is the last resort for any child or any family who have for a child who has a profile like that. And the second thing is that the biggest reason why they come to a mental health professional is because of academic difficulties, not because of their emotional needs, not because of their other developmental needs, but when the academics begins to falter, that's when they will bring, when everything else fails, tutors, scolding and punishing the child, none of that works, then they say, well, the time is probably ripe for us to go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, right? Again, of course, it needs to say that complications and comorbidities are the norm, especially because they're often left to a stage when many things have overtaken their core symptoms of ADHD. I have also found, and we as a service have found, that most parents and families are very reluctant towards medication. They fear the worst, and they will often go and, of course, now they'll Google it and they'll bring out the worst kind of reported symptoms, and they will try every other thing. They'll take them to Patthar Baba, they'll try out homeopathy, Ayurveda, everything under the book till they have exhausted every other option, and then they will come to us for help or particularly medication. And like I said, the emphasis on academic achievement, and that becomes a big a bugbear. It becomes so heavy a burden for the child to carry. And of course, there is a lot of pressure from extended family, immediate community, positive services, limited training. I don't have to mention those things. I'm sure you know all that. And no doubt a lack of infrastructure for children who are wired differently. Our schools are very good for the neurotypical children who are good with language, who are good with reading and maths. It's very good for them. But the moment a child doesn't fit that box, it becomes difficult for them. And that infrastructure of seeing children differently, of being able to appreciate neurodiversity and say that children are different, and our school education system has to cater to that. That often is not there, and that's why I say that there's a lack of infrastructure. Coming to management, there's an overarching philosophy that we believe in, and I'm going to take you through that very quickly. So every child with ADHD, or every child for that matter, is wired and inspired differently, and we see one child, we've seen one child, and what we make of him or her, what we plan for him or her is always unique, and it's tailor-made. So management plans are always unique and tailor-made for each child. So there's no box that fits all children with ADHD. Plans must keep changing with the needs of the child, as you can imagine. You saw some of these, case examples, and how, I'm sure Zorba's need at 4 would be different from the time he becomes 10 or when he's a young adult. It'll change completely, and we have to gear up for that, isn't it? Yeah. So medication is one part of a multimodal strategy. And repeatedly, we have found that if a family, and we never recommend it when a family comes to us and we make a diagnosis and an assessment and diagnosis, and I'll take you through a certain format that we follow, and we often recommend more than one thing to the family, given the need of the child at that time, the developmental needs, what's available out there in school, in the community, in at home, or in our service for that matter. But many of them would, when they get a good response with medication, they withdraw for some time. They might not come back to us for 6 months or a year because they've got a good response, and suddenly things are looking better. But believe you me, 90% of the time, the families will come back and say that it was good for 3 months, but not after that. At the most for 6 months, and then it went south again. It started sliding again, and the reason for that is that it's the dynamics of what this child has in the internal world and the environment is so complex that just a mere tablet or a medicine is not going to cut it. And that's something that we have learned the hard way repeatedly. And we believe that it has to be a multimodal approach. And of course, we believe that outcomes have to be seen in the short and long term, and it's a therapeutic journey, not a cure. We have to tell the, family that your child is not going to change, with medication and therapies in the next few months or even the couple of years. They are going to improve. And if we find them the right environment, they might actually improve in leaps and bounds and actually do very well in life. As so many of I think that the outcomes from our service of kids with ADHD are quite good. And I think that's because we take this approach of acceptance, and also celebrations as a big part of the journey. Because to set the goals, to set the standards of achievement to a level where the child and the family is able to to experience success every now and then. We often say that ADHD over a period of time becomes, or could be called another name, and that is CSDS, and CSDS stands for chronic success deprivation syndrome, and that's what these kids have, right? So often struggle with successes, and that often can give rise to, again, a complex set of complications, as we have seen, right? So what do we do as a part of management? So this is a broad format that we follow, right? We follow and we divide the management into 4 categories. We say that we have interventions, and that comes from our own medical model, where we say that, okay, here's a deficit, here's a difficulty, here are some symptoms, and we need to treat those to help the child become better at it, better at a task, better at overcoming a certain symptom. And so we can, of course, as a part of intervention, therefore, use therapies, use parenting strategies, building the ZPD, or building the skill set of the child. Medication, no doubt, is one part of it. We have occupational therapy, sensory integration therapy as a part of it. We have special educational inputs and so on. So as you can see, the focus here is on what is not working, and the effort to help the child make it work, or help the family make it work. Yeah. So it's in a sense, you can say it's a deficit-based model. The accommodations, on the other hand, is with the philosophy that this child is different, and we cannot expect so much from her or him. And so we are going to cut some slack. We are going to give this child some allowance. We will use our educational system. We'll use some of the support systems at home to be able to support this child, whether it is in behaviors, in their emotional regulation, or in their academic work. Like in their academic work, we might say that they can get extra time for their tests and exams, or they can maybe use a scribe or a writer, or their feedback may be different, or they might even be encouraged to give oral answers in class rather than written answers, or their answers could be made into more objective types, and so on and so forth. There are many such things that all the educational boards allow, including CBSE, ISC, ICSC, and all the the numerous international boards that we have in our country now. So we definitely can support our children, saying that everything will not change overnight. Even if we do the interventions, everything will not change. So we need to support this child and accept that there are some difficulties that the child encounters in the current education system, or what is expected of them here, or maybe in a social milieu. And I think we all need support and help and understanding from time to time, and so do these kids. The third category is A, and A stands for affinities and assets, or in other words, it is also to do with interests and strengths. Affinities are interests and assets are strengths. So each child will come with a set of interests and strengths, and many times they may not overlap. Like a child may be very good in let's say singing, but does not want to go for singing classes, but wants to play football despite the fact that that he's clumsy and he has gross motor difficulty. But that's his passion. He wants to. So when the overlap does not happen, it becomes a bit of a challenge. But our job is to actually look for the overlap. Where is the strength? Where is the where is the affinity or the interest? And how can we bring it together? How can we dovetail this? And this, in my opinion, is perhaps the most important thing that we do, to be able to understand the child's strengths and be able to channelize it. Channelize those energies into activities of interest and strength, whereby the self-esteem improves. And if the self-esteem improves, the motivation goes up. And indeed, the child begins to try harder, even in areas of difficulty. And of course, the last set is lifestyle issues like sleep, diet, routine, exercise, screen, and all that. And I'm sure that you will understand how important those are for a child who's already very disorganized, is probably not able to sleep very well. And the teenagers are probably not sleeping till 4 or 5 in the morning in any case, especially these days, and how difficult that must be. And exercise, the importance of exercise, the importance of limited screen in this world, the digitalized world that we have today. So this is the overall format. But of course, if you break it down into what we can do for children in each category, again, I'm going to take you through this in a jiffy, in a short time. Amongst preschoolers, of course, the question of diagnosis comes up. Can we diagnose a child of 4 or 5 with ADHD? I don't usually do that, and we wait till the time they're 6. But we definitely inform the parents that there is a possibility that they might develop a syndrome like that, or they have the propensity, or they're showing some of the features, and we need to do something now to be able to prevent it as much as we can. So there, the psychoeducation and parenting skills, or etc., can become very, very important indeed. Again, accepting their child is different is the key, and that's again something we work with parents, that your child is not going to turn out like the other kid who puts up his hand and answers all questions and writes his ABC and colors his the coloring books absolutely perfectly. She is not going to turn out like that, but they may have many other talents. They might do many other things that are terrific. This group of kids often respond well to occupational therapy, especially if they have sensory motor difficulties, and they settle down as a result of that. They focus better, they regulate themselves better, and so on, right? Many of them may begin to need a bit of special education inputs, including holding a pencil or writing their first letters or numbers, and so on, right? Medication, again, there's a lot of controversy about using medication in this age group, and I am the last one to use particularly psychostimulants. I don't even use psychostimulants very easily if a child is 6, 7, or 8, although it's recommended. I definitely not in this age group, but sometimes if it is really severe, if the mood dysregulation, or if the child is just unable to settle in some of the social spaces in school, etc., sometimes we do use small doses of an atypical antipsychotic like a risperidone or a aripiprazole or a clonidine. And this is only in very severe cases, and usually we try and not use it as much as we can. So this is the preschooler bit, right? In primary school, the 6 to 11 age range, at this stage, the profile, the cognitive profile, and the educational abilities of the child become very important because the demands increase. And if you're able to do an assessment of that nature, it gives us a lot of insights about what can we expect of the child, where does the child need the support, and so on. And based on reports like this, we can often recommend to school what the accommodations should look like. Should the child get a writer? Should the child get extra time? Should the child be given, a separate space to sit and work? Should the child require a buddy to be able to integrate socially, and so on, right? And of course, we look a lot at the strengths and interest here, because this is also a developmental phase. This is the phase when children are picking up skills. They're picking up academic skills. Somebody's going to a football class. Somebody else is learning the keyboards. Another person, they're making friends, etc. These are all skill sets they're developing. And again, as I said, that kids with ADHD often have this chronic success deficit, and to be able to overcome that, we most certainly focus on what their strengths are, what their assets and affinities are in a big way. In this age group, many times, if there is difficulty with self-regulation, self-esteem, individual therapy, play therapy might help. Group therapy has been extremely useful in some of the cohorts that we've had, and we've used, again, group therapy for social and communication skills and their ability to make friends, and again, to address their self-esteem, because when they're in a group and they're able to identify each other's strengths, they're able to support each other, it goes a long way in building their sense of self. And of course, we attempt our best to what we call building richer narratives, not just talk about the problems in a child. The child is not the problem is the problem. And we need to separate that out and see what else the child does well, so that their story becomes richer, so that they feel good about who they are. And that's a big part of the therapeutic process, both in parenting, in individual work, group therapy, all of that. And here again, we are beginning to look at medication now. We are in some of these kids who, again, have a very significant attention difficulty, which is impeding their learning. We might begin to use methylphenidate, atomoxetine, and so on. So, again, in the secondary school, in teenage years, some of these kids are dropping out of school, and they might need an alternate education pathways. And we have extremes here, right? We have had kids who are not able to cope with CBSE, so they've had to drop some of the core subjects. And this is again something that we do after doing a psychoeducational assessment. Many of these kids can drop big subjects like math, science, or SST and take up easier options depending on what their interests are. Some of them may be excellent, let's say, at culinary skills and might want to take home science. Some others may be exceptional in football or cricket and they're taking physical education and so on, right? So the educational pathway begins to change. Some of them have to sometimes shift to the NIOS, the National Institute of Open Schooling, and some others, paradoxically, some of the brighter kids actually thrive in even tougher systems like the IB. There are kids with ADHD who have moved from CBSE to IB, and because they don't require rote learning, and because they have the intelligence to be able to understand the concepts, they do quite well. Of course, they have to work hard and they need a lot of support there, but it works out for many of these kids with ADHD who are bright and sometimes even gifted, right? Again, identifying strengths, channelizing energy, a lot of rehabilitative and restorative practices. So many of these kids like Sahil get thrown out of school, They actually are asked to leave. And where do they go from there? Or sometimes their punishments they get for misbehaviors, bad conduct, etc. It's so extreme that it only damages them further. So how do we bring about restorative practices? And we can talk about this a little if you have the time after this. We could do that. And again, at this stage, if you're able to co-construct the goals, if we collaboratively make the goals with the young person, the chances of success are much more with the young person and the family, in therapy, in the trajectory with education and what have you, right? Now we also have to begin to treat the emerging comorbidities of anxiety, depression. Again, medication could be for focus, it could be methylphenidate, other psychostimulants, atomoxetine, or sometimes to treat the comorbidities. Going to adults, when young adults come to us after suffering for a good number of years, hearing that they have something like ADHD is a big relief for them, and sometimes for the families even, right? And that itself brings the burden down, that I'm not crazy. It is something that explains some of what I've been through or what I've done or the choices that I've made. It's something that is a big relief. Again, because so many things have become complicated, habits have become firmer, the response to stimulants may not be as dramatic as it is in younger kids. And sometimes we might have to treat the comorbidity first before embarking or starting treatment for ADHD, because the comorbidity itself has taken such a complex and powerful shape that unless we treat that, the ADHD, treating the ADHD doesn't help at all. And when we talk about therapy here, we also talk about healing, because we believe that many of these young people have gone through experiences in life which have wounded them, emotionally wounded them, and the healing process, again, working on self-esteem, healing, involving the family is vital. There's a wonderful book by this very well-known Canadian physician called Gabor Mate, who has ADHD himself. He discovered much later, and all his 3 children also had ADHD, and he has written beautifully. His book is called Scattered Minds, and he's also spoken about how kids with ADHD also almost invariably have attachment issues. And that could be possible because they're such difficult children that parents are not able to form that bond with them as they do with other kids. And they carry that wound and that sense of abandonment or the sense of rejection, which they keep getting from time to time, all through their growing up years. And they develop this sense that I don't belong anywhere. Nobody really wants me. And the healing is about that. The healing is about, again, reintegrating into family, reintegrating into community, and so on, right? And again, in adulthood, we often open up the possibility of a change of educational course. Just because their forefathers were engineers, this young man may not be able to pursue engineering because it's not his passion. He may do exceptionally well in environmental sciences, or become a musician, or be a terrific entrepreneur. And that happens in so many people with ADHD, but may not be able to pursue what they have started off doing. And that could be, again, a somewhat of a big undertaking, right? So is this realistic? I mean, you might ask, is this realistic? See, our service is geared towards this. So we have, a number of specialists. We have psychiatrists, we have a variety of therapists and psychologists, we have occupational therapists, we have career counselors who do evaluations for that, and so on. But then can you not do it? If you're running a, for instance, if you're running a clinic, where are the resources after all? And in our experience, I mean, it's not always that we have to come from an expert position. There's so much of resources within families and schools, colleges, and workplaces. So many colleges these days are open to giving support and accommodations to students. There are many, increasingly more schools who are willing to do it, I would say. I won't say there are many schools, but there are. I'm surprised with the number of, kind of new entrepreneurs and workspaces which are ready to embrace people who are wired differently. In fact, they can see the skill and their creativity, and they embrace them, with open arms sometimes. Uh, there could be resources amongst friends, extracurricular activities, creative spaces in the community, other professionals who might be, your colleagues in the community, occupational therapists, special educators, counselors, speech and language therapists, and so on. And of course, I'm sure that many of you have teams, and I would urge people to include like-minded professionals in your vicinity, in wherever you're working. So what can we do in a clinic after all? We can definitely do psychoeducation, and we can help the family to reframe the difficulties, and again help them understand that a lot of these behaviors are not willful. It is not because the child wants to rile you or wants to be oppositional and wants to rebel. It's because they have no choice after a given point in time, and that there is a underlying situation. We say the child will do something if they can, and if they cannot do it, then it will begin to show in other forms of behaviors. Yeah. um, so evaluate and define immediate goals. Again, collaborative plans are very important. Have realistic goals. Again, I mean, if a child is coming, let's say, with very poor time management skills and is unable to get up and attend, let's say, online classes these days because their organizational skills, their time management skills, as it is, they can't sleep very well. The kids, the adolescents with ADHD, and you expect them to immediately correct their sleep cycle because you've given them a medicine, it's probably not going to happen immediately. So to be able to scale it, to say that what will, and if we are saying that their sleep cycle should improve, their discipline should improve, they should be able to focus better, their behavior towards their parents should also improve, they should begin to complete their homework as well. All of that is not going to happen, and if you put that as the expectation, it's bound to fail. So how do we do that? You set realistic goals, prioritize it, and say what is important right now, and perhaps explore the area of strengths which can get channelized into doing some of this work. Of course, we work with parents, therapies, I mean, all that, therapies or counseling available. Reaching out to schools sometimes helps. You'd be surprised how schools respond if a doctor, psychiatrist, or a psychologist approaches them. Most school, will sit up and listen. Most school will say, yes, we'll try and do what we can, right? And that's a positive thing. And I do think that we should make that little extra effort for our young people, because for them, it's a make or break by the time they come to us, I think. Yeah. And other professionals, of course, OT, special educator, child therapist, I'm sure you'll be able to reach out to them. So very quickly about medication, why use them? I mean, if it's indeed so complex, it's about development, it's about acceptance, it's about accommodation, because it might work, of course, it could help the child, and it might help the family or school, but it is never given. And this is my, it's a value, it's a thumb rule, which I hold on to. It certainly is not to make it easier for parents or school. It is not for the other person. It is for the child to perform or to feel better. So it is focused on the child's needs and not on the needs of the parents or the school. And that's something that I very, very strongly advocate. Yeah. And of course, it's one part of a multimodal approach. Again, I'm presuming that most of you would know enough and more about medication and what is there out there in the community. If you want to have a discussion afterwards, I'm here for the next 20-30 minutes. Yeah. And what are we treating? We are not treating ADHD as such. We are treating symptom clusters. And that is also important to remember, to be able to very clearly define what are we trying to achieve by giving medication at a certain time. Are we treating the attention difficulties? Is it the hyperactivity, impulsivity? Is it the anxiety, mood disorder? Could it be the sensory integration? Could it be socially inappropriate behaviors and aggression and hostility, etc.? What is it that we are trying to target? And that keeps changing in a child with ADHD's life. And of course, we have to treat the comorbidities. So with that, I'm going to just go through it again. I mean, just to remember that nothing succeeds like success. If you're able to help a child who's chronically failing in and not tasted success for the longest time, if you help them to succeed, they'll come back to you. They'll make a better effort. And for that, we have to have realistic goals. Work hard on their confidence and self-esteem. Again, highlight strengths, abilities, modify plans with changing needs. And outcomes have to be in the short term and the long term. And like I said, it's a therapeutic journey. It's not a cure. And acceptance and celebrations is a big part of this journey. And we join the family often in this journey, in the acceptance and definitely celebrations as well. Right. So thank you. I'll stop the screen share and I'll hopefully we have some time for some discussion for people to reflect on some of these things.
Yeah.
They would want to.
Dr. Barot, would you want to kind of begin the proceedings and then I can pitch in also?
Yes, sir. Excellent, comprehensive discussion by Dr. Amit Sen. But being a standalone psychiatrist, I was looking for more about medications and what doses to use, what augmentation therapies to be practiced, which drug to be combined with another drug. If sir could throw some light on it, and what is the role of guanfacine in ADHD?
Okay. I think we will go through some of the questions first, and then I'm sure the medication question would come up again and again. So I have just collated some of the questions, and I just wanted to run them by Dr. Sen. There are a couple of questions which is, I think, overlap. One question is with parental pressure and with expectations, do we not overdiagnose ADHD? And the second, I think the linked one is also with increased screen time. Do symptoms of increased screen time mimic ADHD, and how would you differentiate between these two? So, Amita, if you kind of address that.
Sure, Dr. Yeah. So address the question that you posed first, and then I'll come to Dr. Barot's question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Medication. Okay. So my belief is that ADHD is grossly underdiagnosed, and that is again perhaps because it mimics so many other disorders. More often than not, like I said, I see a diagnosis of in younger children of ODD, conduct disorder, depression, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, in young people whose core issue is one of attention difficulties, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. And they've carried it with them for the longest time. It only gets complicated over time. And that, hello?
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
Because I think the screen changed suddenly. Right. It's borne out by the studies internationally. And also there are not very many community-based studies in India. There is a good a robust study which is school-based, and and not surprisingly, they found a prevalence of 11.3% in the normal population of kids having ADHD. And I'm not because, and perhaps it is to do with the education system. So there are countries like Netherlands and Germany where the prevalence of ADHD is much less. Now that is probably because the education system is much more relaxed. They are much more open and accepting of children who are different. For a large part of primary school years, the academic expectations are minimal. Children go to school mostly to play and learn from their environment and from social interactions. And that is why some of these symptoms that we talked about, or the presentations, the frustration, the emotional dysregulation, etc., does not surface very easily. So in those countries, the prevalence is, let's say, between 3 to 4%, but globally, it is anywhere between 5 to 10%. In India, it appears to be more, as it is in Japan. Again, you can imagine that Japan is a community or a society which is bound by very strict behavioral regulations, isn't it, of good behavior and so on. And when children do not behave like that, they become more visible. as it is in our country. So I think that despite the fact that children perform poorly in a very warped education system, they often do not get picked up for attention difficulties or the core issues that might be contributing to it. That's my my understanding. Yeah. So I think it's underdiagnosed rather than overdiagnosed. Yeah.
Can I just pitch in with one of the responses which has come? I think one of the concerns about overdiagnosis is a lot from the American literature, where it is definitely shown that in Blacks, Hispanics, and ethnic minority groups, there is a lot of increased medication use, and therefore this question about, are you not providing other forms of therapy and just medicating the minority groups? So a lot of the critics of this practice say that ADHD is overdiagnosed in USA in some segments, but at least in India, I entirely agree with Dr. Sen, saying that it's very, very underdiagnosed. But this concern about overdiagnosis has its roots in the huge multiplication of methylphenidate use in USA over the number of years. So I think we need to take cognizance of that fact.
True. In fact, the prevalence of ADHD also in their community-based studies has increased in the last decade or two. I don't remember the exact years, but in the 90s, their prevalence was about 8%. And in the 2000s, it increased to about 11 or 13%. So even in the USA, there, the recognition of it, or they believe the prevalence is quite high. Now, I'm sure there are environmental determinants of this, and we could again discuss this further. But what was the second question you asked about?
This about screen time, so increase.
Oh yeah.
And would it mimic ADHD? How does it cause ADHD? What are your thoughts?
So I doubt it can cause ADHD, but it definitely can mimic it in some ways, because we know that excessive screen time, and this is again fairly well documented, or screen addiction, can give rise to a short attention span, emotional lability, in fact, reduced memory. In fact, in recent studies where they have extensively done neurocognitive studies as well as brain scans, etc., have found that there's cortical thinning, etc., especially in the frontal lobes in children who use excessive screen, and their language development and social development is stunted. So if you look at it like that, then it could in many ways mimic not just autism, but many other neurodevelopment perhaps. But I don't agree that it can cause it. What it can do is worsen it. And again, because kids with ADHD often gravitate towards screen very easily, because the screen is a very stimulating environment, very stimulating object, multisensory stimulation. And because again, like I said, that our infrastructure is not there to cater to children who can very easily go out and play. The fear about safety, there's hardly any spaces for young children and adolescents to go and have safe, clean fun. So what is a phone or a laptop or a TV? That's what it is, isn't it? And particularly with children who have ADHD, who have abundance of energy and they can't channelize it, they will gravitate towards screen like how, and they tend to become addicted to screen, in my opinion, or in my experience, faster than other children do. And we see this complex combination of things of a child with ADHD not just getting addicted to substances or abusing substances, but also abusing screen.
Yeah. So I will
moderators, moderators, could you please collate the questions and take the expert comments?
I'm collating.
Jairam sir is doing, sir. Dr. Jairam sir is doing, sir. So it's good. Sir is doing it.
Now we will go to two questions which are, I think, linked. One is Dr. Barot's question regarding, how would a standalone clinician in psychiatry practice start treating children with ADHD? And the second related question is, there is a very interesting question which I feel you have a lot of experience in dealing with, is through your Salam Balak Trust experience, is the one with ADHD with comorbid inhalant abuse in marginalized and very poor socioeconomic conditions. So first, how do you start treatment for a standalone, tips for a standalone clinician, and then inhalant abuse and
Sure. So as far as medication is concerned, I think all the evidence and the clinical experience points towards psychostimulants as being the mainstay of treatment, no doubt, right? Typically speaking, and again, in my experience, children from the age of 8 to 10 years begin to respond if we've got the diagnosis right very well. The research data also shows that if we use one psychostimulant, like let's say methylphenidate, which is the only one available in our country, we have a 70 to 80% chance of hoping or expecting a good response. If we have the luxury or the freedom to choose more than one, if one does not work, then we use another, like dexamphetamine salts, etc. Then that rate goes up to 90. So 90% of the kids who are, or young people, or even adults for that matter, who get diagnosed with ADHD are likely to respond well to a psychostimulant. How do you use psychostimulant? Of course, is there are many facets to it. One is, of course, that we have to start with a low dose. The body takes a little time to adapt to it, and the best practice is to actually use a short acting or instant release preparation twice or thrice in a day with a small dose of maybe 5 milligrams twice, and then go up to 10 milligrams, depending on the age of the child. If a child is older, if a child is an adolescent and is coming for the first time, I do not hesitate sometimes to use a sustained release, a small tablet of a sustained release, or even an extended release tablet right at the outset, because their bodies and physiology is more accepting of the psychostimulant. The commonest cause commonest side effect which worries parents, of course, in an Indian context particularly, is the reduction of appetite, and we have to think hard as to how to manage that. Again, there are various strategies to do with that, of giving intermittent meals, giving a lot of fluids and some small snacks in between, of making sure that the overall nutritional inputs throughout the day is adequate, with a good breakfast and a heavy dinner, and so on and so forth, right? So there are many ways of tackling those things, but again, methylphenidate by far is the number one medicine that one can use in our country. And I'm sure most of you would know of the different preparations. The sustained release variety comes by the name of Inspiral SR or MDET SR, and the extended release, and also perhaps Advise OD. There's a controversy about whether it is sustained release or extended release. They claim it is extended release. Perhaps it is slightly longer acting than the sustained release one. And then, of course, you have the Concerta, which is a lot more expensive, but definitely a very good choice if a family can afford it. So that's as far as the psychostimulants are concerned. It changes many things. It changes the ability, cognitive faculties, attention, ability to learn and memorize, productivity, output. It changes impulsive behaviors, hyperactivity. It reduces those. It changes social behaviors. The child is more accepted by the peer group. They bond better. Parent-child relationships have shown to improve after the use of psychostimulants. So the range of benefits that you get is quite substantial. However, like I said, in our scenario, if a child is too young, for instance, then I'll be really hesitant to use a psychostimulant, because the kind of side effects, particularly the appetite, suppression, and sometimes the mood swings and the irritability that a child has, the little children do, the young children do. So I would rather use, as I mentioned, an atomoxetine, or sometimes an atypical antipsychotic, especially if a child has sensory motor or emotional dysregulation difficulties. And that often settles them down, and they are better able to engage with not just the social, skills and expectations, but also sometimes in academic learning and activities. Sometimes we have to use, a combination of things. If a child is coming with anxiety, we might have to use an SSRI. That's a combination that I use sometimes, of a psychostimulant and an SSRI. And so on. So the list goes on. There are many other things. Guanfacine is something that I think
someone asked. Yeah, Dr. Barot asked. Yeah.
Barot asked, but that's I know it's not available in our country. So what we use is something similar, which is clonidine. And clonidine again is effective more for the hyperactivity and impulsive behaviors, and sometimes the emotional dysregulation rather than the attention difficulties, in my experience. I don't know whether Dr. Ram might want to add something to that. Do you think, do you have a different take on the clonidine? But clonidine can be effective, when other things, the other agents do not work, if a child has too many side effects, or if the child is too young, we can use clonidine in place of guanfacine. Now, the dose of clonidine again is can be up for debate, because most people hesitate to use more than half a tablet or one tablet. But actually, what helps a child, even if they're 7, 8 years old, is probably about 2, 3, or even 400 micrograms, which is 3, 4 tablets in one day. And that's the but of course you have to go very slowly. You have to go titrate the dose, and you have to start with half a tablet, go up to one, and every 3, 4 days keep increasing till the time you reach 3 to 4 tablets, and you are likely to get the best benefit at that level. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know whether I answered your question, Dr. Barot, but I mean, we can keep talking about the medication for the rest of the night. I didn't focus on it because I thought that that's something the psychiatrists, of course, he would know a lot about. And yeah.
Sir, one last query. Can we combine methylphenidate and atomoxetine?
Yes, we can. Oh, absolutely, we can. Yeah, and I have done that. Good results sometimes. We can definitely use. The only thing that we have to probably keep an eye on the pulse and blood pressure a bit, and sometimes, because both are prone to affect mood. I mean, the again, young people, especially adolescents or young adults who are prone to developing a bipolar disorder, it could, I mean, either one of these two can trigger it. And so one has to be a little cautious with that, especially
Right.
if there is a history of bipolar disorder in the family.
Right, sir.
Yeah, sir, if I may.
Yes, Dr.
So
Ali.
there is a series of questions actually, starting with a few generic ones. What is the role of occupational therapist? What occupational therapist क्या करता है ऐसे बच्चों के साथ? How does he play out the things?
Right. What they do I mean, it can. I mean, I'm sure some of you who work in association with neurologists or neurosurgeons know that occupational therapists will work there for rehabilitation and so on. But with little children, they specialize in it, and some of them develop these set of skills called sensory integration or sensory processing therapy. And many of these younger kids who have ADHD, like I said, have sensory motor difficulties. They may have fine motor difficulties. They may have a low muscle tone. They may be clumsy with their actions. They may be extremely sensitive to taste, sounds. They may be very fussy eaters, and that actually distracts them. The sensitivity to visual, auditory, gustatory, or tactile cues actually makes them very distractible and fidgety and restless. And what the occupational therapists do through a set of exercise, which is again very tailor-made, depending on what the child's need is, what are the kind of sensations the child is experiencing. They give exercises, they take them through exercises, give a home plan to the parents, and that actually settles the child down. And in our experience, the child becomes more focused, they become more emotionally regulated.
Sir, any hypothetical example कि you remember something कोई बच्चे के साथ ऐसा किया था? So what was actually done?
Let's say, for instance, there are children who seek vestibular and proprioceptive stimuli. Okay, and by and the way they do it, and the way they do it. Just give me a second. I'm sorry. Yeah, and the way they do it is by let's say rocking in a chair, or they might slide out of a chair, or they might often seek a lot of physical proximity from people, which begins to irritate their siblings or their friends, etc., and or their parents even sometimes, right? And that again can be very distracting. So an occupational therapist might give them pressure in a controlled environment by putting soft bags on them, which have a certain weight, and roll it on their backs, let's say, right? And that actually helps them to calm down. And indeed, such children, if they're also, let's say, given massages, which are deep and prolonged, right, they settle down, right? Or let's say children who have a need to fidget, yeah, and they require let's say a need to move when they're learning. And indeed, these children learn much better when they're moving. So they're given certain articles during the time they're learning. So they're given things like Play-Doh or a putty, or they might be given some rough textured surfaces to handle. And when they are playing with that, and then they're attending to let's say a class, or they're doing some learning exercise, or getting engaged in a discussion, they perform much better. And this is again borne out by fairly robust studies. And indeed, some of the international schools, like there is an international school in Delhi, the American Embassy School, who are ready to provide students who have this kind of a profile. Let's say they give them gym balls to sit on. So instead of sitting on chairs, they're sitting on these big balls in a classroom, and they're rocking. Yeah, and some of them actually get a fidget under the table, so they're fidgeting under the table. It's stuck under the table, or they get a band, a TheraBand, stuck to the legs of their chair, and so they're actually playing with the legs like this in a classroom. And that is because of the understanding that these kids need to channelize their physical energy in a manner which will help them to focus better. So the occupational therapist is the specialist in deciding and evaluating what this particular child needs and when. And I've seen this happen all the time with great success. Yeah. So the occupational therapist has a very, very prominent role in the early development of children, and in various profiles, ADHD, autism spectrum. They're very valuable indeed. And I'm sure Dr. Ram will bear me out, and he has worked with occupational therapists as well, right? Will you unmute?
Unmute yourself.
Good, sir. Jairam sir, you're...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Will you unmute?
Yeah. Right. No, I think occupational therapy is something which we understand so little, and my own knowledge has grown over the years simply by working with occupational therapists and realizing how much difference it can make. I think it's enormous. But I personally feel that we have a very poor understanding of the sensory issues, which is quite common in children, both with autism and ADHD. Anything about substance misuse, with the couple of points from your experience, which was a point mentioned? How much time have we got left?
So we have got 10 minutes. So one question on substance abuse, where they have specifically asked about inhalant abuse.
Inhalant abuse.
In the lower socioeconomic strata.
Yeah.
The comorbidities.
So see, substance misuse is often substances are often used by children, especially with ADHD, as self-medication, right? Of course, kids with ADHD are more impulsive, so they are led more easily. There is peer pressure, there is curiosity. In the beginning, most kids by the time they're 14, 15 have a lot of knowledge about, and it's available everywhere now in middle school. From middle school onwards, substances are available. Most kids will experiment with them and move on and not make it a habit. But kids with ADHD, especially the ones who also begin to have anxiety, stress, frustration, etc., they begin to use it as self-medication. So many of them actually say that it makes them calmer. Some of them even claim that it makes them more focused. So there are some states in the US, for instance, where it's not completely legal, like in California. I think it probably is now, but for the longest time it wasn't. But if you had a certificate saying you have ADHD, you could buy cannabis legally, because there was this understanding that the cannabis will help these kids to calm down, to reduce their impulsivity, and to focus better, right? So, and of course, there's rebellion, and there is this, should I say, reputation they have of becoming the bad boy, right? The bad boy who misleads other kids, and they gravitate towards other kids who are badly behaved as well. And there, this misuse of a substance is much more prevalent, in that group of kids who are probably not doing very well academically, who are probably ostracized by a large part of their classroom or teachers, etc. Then they seek solace in some of these kind of activities, right? The inhalant thing is very, very common, particularly in street children, and many of them actually do have conditions like post-traumatic stress disorder. They have attention difficulties, they have learning difficulties, and the other thing the inhalant does, again, and this is, I do work very closely with street children, and the other thing it does is it suppresses appetite. So these kids often say that not only does it make us feel calmer, but it also suppresses. So when I'm hungry, I will go and take a shot of or a sniff of a glue or a whitener, because it's not just suppresses my appetite, but police ka lathi bhi kam lagta hai. So when the police comes and beats these kids up, they don't feel the pain so much. So it has many such from their point of view benefits for them. So kids with this profile of being hyperactive, impulsive, risk taking, etc., living in the fringes of society, they gravitate towards this behavior for more than one reason. It's not just about the attention difficulties. It could be many complicated reasons like that, which pushes them towards such behaviors, I think, right? And it's easily available and it's cheap. It's you walk into a stationery store, you go to a gas, there's so many different kinds of inhalants that you get out there. So it's the easiest go-to thing, really.
So I
That's
think
my
it's a far
understanding
more
of it, yeah.
complex management. We really can't only think in terms of pharmacological management in
Not
such
at all.
children. Is-
Not at all. So the rehabilitative process in these children, I mean, again,
Yeah.
sorry. Yes,
So you
Dr.
want
Alim,
to-
you were, yeah,
Yeah.
sure. The thing is that I work for a few organizations, few NGOs. One of them is called Salam Balak Trust, and they have been working with street children for the longest time, for many for a few decades now. And their program of rehabilitating children is become very evolved. And one part of it is a mental health program, and it's an integral, central part of the whole, process of rehabilitating these children, bringing them to the mainstream of life. And besides education, nutrition, giving them a home, etc., the mental health becomes a very important aspect where we do life skills education. We take them through transitions. We treat their ADHD or trauma and all of that. And if they indeed have a substance misuse problem, such as inhalants, or if they're dependent on it, we just don't send them to a de-addiction center or just treat them with medication. It never works. I mean, I'm sure all of you know about the revolving door phenomena with substance misuse and addiction. I mean, you bring them into an inpatient facility, detoxify them, send them back, and within a few weeks they're back again, isn't it? Yeah. And that's exactly what happens with children who are traumatized, who have deep emotional issues. Unless we are able to address those things systematically through group work, through individual therapy, with medication, with rehabilitation, and accepting them, so giving them a sense of belonging in a certain community, it doesn't work. So we have tried different models, even in communities which live on footpaths and besides the New Delhi railway station, and there our job is so much more difficult because we are not able to provide the others, the other aspects of the child's development. The emotional needs, the emotional well-being is not being taken care of. But if we are able to take those kids and take them to our centers, then it's a different story altogether. So the large majority of them can kick the habit. The large majority of them then can begin to do what we were talking about just a while ago, where we can identify their strengths, we can rehabilitate them, we can give them some meaning and direction in their lives.
Yeah,
So
sir, another basic question. How do we deal with inattention? And what is the role of special educators?
So, of course, like I said, there are various therapies. In a very young child, OT might help. Then as the child grows up, and if you do not want to use medication too quickly, we can use therapeutic strategies, which are called executive skill trainings, where they're given certain exercises to do, where their attention can grow. There are many other things.
Sir, with example of a child, any child that you can recall.
So, for instance, a child who is, we can also use incentives, who can, let's say, let me think of one who probably will sit no more than 10 to 15 minutes, even under supervision. So what we do then is that say, okay, let's do this for 10 minutes, a written work, which he hates doing, right? And then we can do this little painting, and then you can take break. So 10 minutes of writing, then a painting that you really like doing, yeah? And then we will take a short break, and then we will come back again. And then if we are able to repeat that cycle 4 times, then you and I will go and fly a kite or play a game of chess, which the child really, yeah. So after some time, when he's got into this rhythm of doing this 10 minutes, let's say 3 to 4 times in 1 hour's time, then after that you say, wow, you're doing this very, very well. Why don't you make, you've really succeeded. Why don't we make it 12 minutes now? Let's see if 12 minutes works for you, right? And let's see if you do it better. And then again, so that way there is a sense of success that the child gets, and the effort. So there is always an element of effort in any job that you have to focus on, especially if you're not interested in it. If you're really passionate about something, you don't need effort, right? But if you have to do written work, particularly for a child who does not like doing it, it's very effortful. And for us to motivate the child to make that effort so that he feels successful at the end of it is the crucial thing, is the key. And if we are able to repeat that, through different strategies, we can then begin to improve the attention by and by. And soon that child, and there are children who are, after some time, with the help of both medication and executive skills training at different age groups. For instance, I can immediately recall a child who I reviewed yesterday, right? Now, this child came to me when he was in grade 9, and he was a national level squash player, and he was doing exceptionally well there. He was supposed to be very bright in his head, but he was really struggling with his 9th class syllabus. So when we did the evaluation, we realized that he clearly fitted into ADHD, no question about that, right? So we did a psychoeducational assessment, we submitted it to school, they supported him through it, we put him on medication. In grade 12, this kid who was finding it hard to clear his class 9 got 95% and is now doing history honors in Stephens. Yeah. So, and of course, what he went through was not just medication, but support from school. He went through therapy. He had all these executive skill training, etc. And soon, when he started realizing that he has the potential, his self-esteem came back, and he started getting the marks. He started trying harder, and with each step, each success, he tried harder and harder. And by the end of it, he is. And we have many such stories to tell. I can say it with a degree of.
So when to refer, time is getting short. When to refer a child to NIOS and IB, वहाँ पर कैसे admission होता है?
देखिए admission तो NIOS में बड़ा आसान है. You have to go to the website and you just have to register, right? And you have to tell them till when the child has studied and give that certificate to school. So you can join NIOS at different classes. You can do it at class 3, class 5, class 8, class 10th, class 12th, and they do it in chunks. So for instance, if a child has, let's say, more or less cleared till class 8, but 9, 10th is becoming very difficult, you register the child with NIOS, and some schools also hold regular classes for NIOS. There are a bunch of schools in Delhi now who run programs 5 days a week for NIOS only, right? And they're highly specialized in doing that, and their teachers are trained in it, and they also focus a lot on extracurriculars. So it's a win-win situation, and we do refer a lot of kids to these schools, right? The advantage of NIOS is that you can choose to take the exams when you're ready for it. So you can take multiple exams in a year, and you can choose to take as many exams as you want. So you can take 1 exam, you can take 3 exams at a time. So it gives a child that flexibility and that comfort that I don't need to have all this burden all at once. Yeah. So children who really struggle with academics and who do not want to pursue an academic career, in the future, and not a big one at least. Actually, there are few who turn around. After they succeed in NIOS, they say that I do want to go to college. And there are so many who have gone to college after NIOS as well, right? But the ones who go to IB are usually kids who are intellectually or in their language are gifted. Yeah. And
so
yet they're
IB?
struggling.
I don't
IB is
know.
International Baccalaureate, and it is the board is. I mean, it was started in Switzerland, but it's an international board now, and many top schools in the world actually use this, and it actually has a huge advantage amongst all the boards, international boards, in getting admissions in some of the top universities, including the Ivy Leagues. If you do well in IB, then you have a good chance of getting into some of the top universities in the world. So some of the kids who come to us who are diagnosed with ADHD in 9, 10, and we realize that these children are exceptionally bright, but are struggling because of attention difficulties. Rote learning is a huge issue because of attention difficulties. They then are, sometimes we suggest it, that why don't you try IB? Now, IB actually is a much more, in terms of academic burden, it's much more. But the way they learn is different. There's a lot of research work. You have to use your own mind. And kids with ADHD who cannot rote learn are able to do very well in that, actually. Some of them excel. Some of them come out as,
Someone has put a comment that it is very costly also.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it is.
Schools are very expensive.
It is.
It's very expensive.
There is just
Amrit, one question if you don't kill me.
I think
We're only asking questions.
Amit sir, I'll combine two questions into one.
Dr.
We were
Ramos,
talking about.
say something about it. I'm sorry, I'm
No,
very
no,
keen to
it
hear.
has been already answered by Dr. Barot. What is NIOS? It's National Institute of Open Schooling. So that's what I.
We have it in Bhubaneswar. We all the major places have it.
It's there everywhere. It's across the
Yeah,
country.
they're everywhere.
Yeah,
sir,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
And
Amit sir, when we were talking, you talked about narrative therapy. So a
Yeah.
few lines on this, how is changing the narrative and what resources do you have, and you do training, you tell. So uske bare mein if you can give an overview, a brief one.
Okay. So narrative therapy is one of the new forms of therapy. It's called a postmodern form of therapy, which believes in 2-3 different things. One is it believes that our personalities, our lives, who we believe we are, is built on stories that we hear about our childhood, the kind of messages that we get from our parents, from our teachers, the things that are said about us. They all make the people who we are, right? And narrative therapy works with that concept that those narratives can change. Some people who have a disability or have bad behaviors according to the norms, etc., often end up with a very what we call problem saturated narrative, which means when people talk about let's say a Sahil, oh my God, Sahil is such a problem. Oh, don't let your son play with Sahil. He's bad news. He'll give him cannabis to smoke or something like that. So everybody is talking about something that is negative, wrong with this kid, isn't it? Yeah, and that's a very problem saturated narrative. Whereas Sahil actually has lots of other talents. He's good in music. He's a philosopher. He's a debater, etc. And because the problems become so big, the rest of who the person is, that completely gets shrouded under it. And narrative therapy actually works to bring that out. That's why we work so much with strengths, abilities. That's a general philosophy of it. Narrative therapy, of course, is a very specialized form of therapy which has many techniques besides the philosophy. The other thing they believe in is one quote that I use. This is a quote that they often use, is that the problem is the problem. The person is not the problem. So, again, what happens often is that when a person develops a mental illness, we often say, oh, that ADHD child, oh, that schizophrenic man. The man has schizophrenia, but is much more than the schizophrenia, isn't it? And that's the approach that narrative therapy takes. And indeed, we have a collaboration with the center which started narrative therapy. It was started by a gentleman called Michael White and he built a center in Adelaide in Australia called Dalit Center. We have a formal arrangement with them and we run courses. Now we run yearly certificate courses and where the faculty comes from different parts of the world. They come from all continents. And I mean, this year they all did it online. Last year they had come from different places, but this time they did it online. So yeah, we do offer this, this therapeutic training. Amongst many other, Children First is, gives a lot of their resources and time to training of different kinds.
So we had a lot of speakers who had come, on child psychiatry who talked about narrative therapy. So can you do a session for us maybe in the next couple of months on this?
Okay. Or perhaps what I can do is I can ask one of my colleagues who are a part of their management and faculty who can come and do that, right?
So one good resource person. Thank you so much.
That would be wonderful, sir.
Absolutely.
Because people
they'll be able to do it much better than I can. I mean, I have done some courses in narrative therapy. I couldn't complete. So, in fact, if you saw I do believe I have ADHD. I said so right in the beginning. And I find it very hard to complete courses and books and articles. I still do. Yeah. And I started the certificate, 1 year certificate course, halfway down. There were so many assignments to give. I could not keep up to it and I dropped out, honestly. Right. So, but I have some idea of it. I do practice it. I am a trained therapist. I do therapy. A large section, at least 50% of my time goes into doing therapy. And I do use a lot of principles of narrative therapy and some techniques too. I'll be happy to do it, but I think somebody else from my team will do it better.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay.
So over to the chairperson, sir.
Okay. So, Dr. Barot, would you like to? I think I will finish. Yeah. So thank you, Dr. Sen, for again a wonderful, wonderful presentation. I think what you have highlighted is a developmental perspective in ADHD, which I think is very important. So ADHD in a child with a 3-year-old is different from one who has a 7-year-old with ADHD and how it morphs into something completely different when the child is about 15 or 16 or even older. I think what the highlight has been for me is the fact that it is a very dynamic process of treatment. So we really need to evolve with the child and uh, present a cogent treatment plan which changes according to the changing developmental needs of the child. And a very, very large part is kind of to be advocate for the child, think beyond medication. And I honestly believe, which you have highlighted, that most of us are capable of thinking creatively and doing a lot of therapeutic work despite our, short span of time. And I think what this whole session highlighted is that we definitely need one at least more session on the medication, purely on the pharmacological part, which hopefully Amrit, Aleem and Sir would definitely organize. And yeah, over to Dr. Barun for his final comments.
Excellent, comprehensive discussions about ADHD. I was really impressed with all the information that I got. As a standalone psychiatrist, it may not be exactly useful to me because I don't have a multidisciplinary team, but still, it was an excellent session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much indeed. I really appreciate the very large gathering and the kind of participation. I'm very, I'm quite overwhelmed by it, honestly.
It is
Sir, many questions are left out. They're
Sir,
still
2
remaining.
minutes. Sir, 5 minutes. Dr. Tufan, sir, please get in, sir. Sir, chairperson. Organizing chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Sen, for such a lucid presentation. And as it has been really highlighted and requested by Amrit, we would like to arrange another session with practical instructions on directive therapy, because people are waiting for that, and people are always waiting for what will come. And you see, this Thursday, there are minimum meetings in all the states and foundation day. I was a little skeptic what would the attendance, but we have got a very good attendance in spite of everything. So I thank you very much for a lucid presentation. I don't want to further the discussion because it is 9:53, 7 minutes to 10. And I also thank Dr. Sanjay and Dr. Ram for accepting our request to chair the session, and they have given very good inputs. Thank you, all of you. And as always, thanks a lot to Ali and Amrit.
I'll give the official thanks, sir. I'll give the official thanks from IPS Odisha State Bench. So thank you, Dr. Amit, sir. We had heard a lot about you. It is nice seeing you. Ali was telling we have to call Dr. Amit. We have to call Dr. Amit. Then I told, let us call Jairam sir also and Dr. Sanjay sir. Wonderful people. People are asking me, where does Dr. Jairam practice? Where Dr. Sanjay Barot practices? I've told them where you practice. Personal chats.
Amit, just one last comment.
Sir.
वो मेरे जो ब्रोशर सब भेजे थे उसके अंदर डॉक्टर संजय बारोट 2 बार लिखा था. I showed it to my wife. My wife thinks that I am a charlatan, so she was really impressed. Double doctor हो आप.
So another good thing about Dr. Sanjay Barot, he has the best sense of humor I have seen. Maybe 1 or 2 top 3 in the country in terms of psychiatry who has a sense of humor. He was always neutral. So thank you, Sanjay sir, for your wonderful comment. Thank you, Dr. Tufan sir. Again, I would like to thank our Odisha State Bank President, Dr. Surjit Sahu, our Secretary, Subhendu sir. This Dr. Subhendu is sitting beside me. Then our CME Chairperson, Torrent Pharmaceutical, Dr. Aleem. Always he wants to ask questions, he wants to get into everything, and he puts me in the shadow. People have even forgotten that I'm one of the moderators. Thank you so much. This is the first session of the new year. Amit sir was excellent, brilliant.
Thank you, Prakash sir. Prakash sir is here.
We have 2 senior people. Dr. Prakash sir, we have felicitated him today. Prakash sir, any comments before we end this session?
Prakash sir, please unmute and speak.
Ask and request to unmute, sir. Sir has to click it.
So, okay, sir. Sir, I think sir is not able to unmute.
Can you hear me?
We can hear, but there's
Can
some
you
lag.
hear me? now?
Yes, sir, we can hear
We
you.
can hear you.
Thank you much, everybody. Thank you, organizers. I'm really surprised why you honor me in the new year. This is a wonderful gift for the person like me in the new year.
I think his connection is dropped.
So the new year started on a brilliant note. We had,
Yeah.
sir, we had more than 300 registrations. More than 240 people had logged in. 180 was the highest. So it was little less on our Thursday music, but because everywhere in the country there is a celebration going on, so the logins will, and maybe people are not here out of the new year mode. But thank you, everybody. It was wonderful. We hope to see you next time again. Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you, Amit. Bye bye. Bye bye.
Yeah, good
Bye,
night.
sir.
Bye.
Bye, bye,
Thank you,
Sanjay sir.
Ram, sir.
Bye, Raj.
Thank you, Dr. Ram.
Ganpati, sir.
Thank you.
Subhendu.
Amit sir, many questions are remaining. You have to come again.
We'll call Dr.